Hello and welcome to another session on practice of spread operator. So in this practice session of ours, we'll not only try to apply the principles that we have learned in the previous session in which we saw the spread operator in JavaScript, but all the knowledge that we have gained up till now regarding the different concepts that we'll see in a minute, we'll try to apply them to make an to-do list application, which is sort of a real use one. So let's see what I'm talking about. So here's our starting code sandbox. And here, this is the kind of to-do list app that we have. So similarly, the folder structure is as it is. I have created the starting code for you regarding this creation and styling and all of that. So what are the instructions? Let's see them one by one. So first one is to make the app work by applying what you've learned. Okay, this is self-explanatory. Then it's the first instruction says that when new text is written into the input, its state should be saved. All right, which means whenever we are typing something in here, like we saw that how with every change in the input field, the state should update of any stateful variable. So the number one instruction asks us to do that. Second is when the add button is pressed, the current data in the input should be added to an array, which means that if I click on this add button, this particular data should get stored into an array, and the unordered list should display all the array items as list elements, which means that upon addition of this particular input into our array that we have also taken, then all the elements at the current moment in time that our array contains, they should be displayed here one by one as these list elements. Okay, so it's a very straightforward one, and it will allow you to make use of many concepts learned along the road. So as a first step, we'll fork out our own copy of this sandbox, and you can pause this now and give it a go yourself. All right, so let's see what we can do here. So the number one point says that when new text is written into the input, its state should be saved, which means that the first thing that we need to do is to create a stateful variable. All right, so let's call our variable input text, and the function, the setter of this, let's call it set input text, like this. I'm writing IP for short for input. Then we'll use the useState hook. You see that as soon as I type this, and when it is being auto suggested by this code sandbox, so as soon as you hit enter or click this, the addition of this from React modules, importing this as a non-default, this particular line of code will get automatically added inside our sandbox. And initially we want this input text to be empty, so we'll initialize it with the empty string. Now another thing is, we want this particular stateful constant or the stateful variable of ours to update whenever there is a change in this input field. That means we will have to get into this input field of ours, and since we are looking forward to do something whenever there's a change in here, we will make use of the onChange method over this input field. Now before we forget doing this, let's also make the value of this input field equals to input text, so that it is binded or kept in sync with this input text variable. And along with the mentioning of this, we are now making this input as a control component. So for this onChange one, let's create another function called handle change. Let me copy this, and in here we can initialize this function. We can see what this handle change function will do. So now, since this is getting passed on, this is getting called from this onChange method, and we have learned that the input field also sends an event whenever this event is triggered. All right. So in here, this event, what we are interested in is the value, the current value that the input field has. So let's create a new constant and let's call this constant value. Okay. And then in here, we are interested in event.target that will point to the input element of ours and the value attribute of it. Okay. Now take note that in here, we don't need anything such as array destructuring or something like that, or object destructuring, because we are just concerned, we just want this particular value in here. Okay. So since there's only one single thing, no need for array or object destructuring. The next thing we want to do is update this input text, and by the usage of this setter to this value of ours. So we hope that with up till this point, the first instruction is completed, that when a new text is written, its state should be saved. And how do we cross check this? I'm opening this inside a new tab and then heading over to the inspect part, and in here, using the React developer tools, we can see that we have a new state in here. Okay. And then as soon as I type something here, you can see that my state is getting updated. Okay, which means that the state is getting saved. So up till here, our first job is done. The second part asks us that when the button is pressed, the current data in the input should be added to an array. This means that we are in need of a new array to store all of this. All right. So let's call our array tasks, and let me call this, the setter of this, as set tasks. Now in use state hook of ours here, we'll initialize this array as an empty one. Okay. And what do we want to do with this array? We want to have every element of this array displayed as a new list item in here. So we can head over here. And how do we do this? So in order to do this, if you remember studying in one of the previous session, how can we loop over this array in order to let's say apply a particular loop on this, which indeed helps us in taking out one element at a time, which we can further use accordingly. So if you were able to remember correctly, we are in dire need of this map method. So this map method was basically the one that helps us loop over such data structures like this array of ours. And in here, inside the map of ours, we will create an arrow function, and we know that as the first parameter here, we can pass the singular task. All right. So this task that we have, this signifies each singular element out of this tasks array. So I hope that this task and tasks does not clash over. Okay, so let's call it something else. Let's call it indi task, short for individual task. All right. And then when we get hold of each individual element of this array, we can then return a list item like this. And in here, we want to display this individual task of ours. All right. So up till now you can see that this particular code of ours is not working, and the reason for that is that this is being interpreted as like simple strings and something. All right, so even if you try to look over here, it is not recognizing what this task.map is. And we know that in order to make our code sandbox understand the logic of JavaScript that we write, we need to wrap this. Okay, we need to wrap this inside curly braces. So now you can see, now we have this respective coloring that indicates that okay, this task and map and all of this is getting recognized. Now, since you can see that inside this arrow function, we have just one single return statement. So that means we can remove this return from here. Okay, like this. And since we have only one parameter, we can remove these braces as well. Let's try to bring them at one line. So this particular one is corresponding to this one. So again, since we need to signify that the function body of ours is represented by these braces, right? And then another one to cover that parentheses of ours. So up till here is the parameters of this map method, and then these curly braces represent that we are writing JavaScript inside them. Okay, so up till here we have ensured that every singular element inside this tasks array of ours, which is a stateful array, it should get displayed over here as list elements. Now all we want to do is add items to this array whenever this add button is pressed. So in order to do that, we have to head over to this button of ours, and then since we are talking about clicking of a button, we'll make use of this on click button, and then let's say we call a function handle click, and then if we try to initialize this handle click function, so what do we need to write inside this handle click of ours? We basically need to make use of this set tasks that will update this array with the current input text that we have, so that this current input text is added as a new element inside our array. So first, if we write set tasks, what else is the thing that we can observe from here is that although we need to add this input text inside our array, but we also need to add it to the original version that we have of this tasks, which means that we are required to access the previous version of the array, and in that we have to append one more entry, which means that we will have to make use of another function inside this set tasks method, and in here we can make use of the previous value that will contain the previous version of this array, and inside here we need to return an array. So the array that we need to return in here, first of all, we'll use the spread operator so that we can signify that the previous entries of this array should be retained, and then we need to append the input text, new input text, as a new element to this array. So that is one thing. Now another thing is that in here what we can do is, once this input text is added inside this, after clicking of this add button, we want this input field to get empty. All right, because for example, if you wrote something like ABCD and once it's added inside the array, you want this input field to get empty. You don't want to hit backspace or let's say add the next task as a concatenation to the previous one. So how can we clear this or basically empty this input text variable? We can make use of this set input text, and then make this input text equals to an empty string. So now we can see that most of the heavy lifting is done, and we can try to see whether the app of ours is working as expected or not. So first of all, let's again head over to the React developer tools in order to visualize what we are doing. So in here you can see that we have one state, that is a string, and then we have one array. So let's say if I add a new task in here, okay, first of all the stateful variable got updated, and then when I click this button you can see that this learn coding is added as a new list entry, and this part is now empty. So let's try to see what happens if we comment this part out, and if we save this and if we try to reload this, and we are looking inside the React developer tools, and let's say we wrote something like this and I hit add button. So you can see that whatever I wrote, it is still there because the stateful variable did not get cleared with the corresponding addition or the appending of each of these input into our array. So that is actually the usage of us using this set input text function here in order to again clear the input. All right, so that was the reason for that. And let's say if we write something like this, okay, I don't know the spelling, I think. Let's say I write this, then I click add, then these two variables are getting added. Now one thing you can see that we are seeing a warning in here which is saying that each child in our list should have a unique key property. So if you remember the previous session that we did, in the previous practice session, we had to explicitly create another set of entries that signifies, so that the React identifies each of these entries inside our array as unique elements, and in order to do that we needed to have a key for them. So I will not be doing that again inside this session, and I want you to do this as a homework. And if you at all get stuck, I highly recommend you head over to that previous session in which we discussed about this key property of these arrays. So with this particular challenge is now complete. You can cross check this by doing this, and we can see it keeps on getting added as new list elements. All right, so how was it? Were you able to solve the problem? So in this session, as we had this little system of ours where we learned a topic and then we applied them in a practice session. So in here we had a little mini project of ours that was this to-do list, and inside this we saw that not only the spread operator but many other concepts were 2 or 3 previous concepts in this in order to achieve our task. And that's basically what learning development is. You keep learning these concepts, and then when you go out in the real world to apply them, the problems don't come that can be handled by one knowledge or one particular topic only. You need to have this collection of these topics, and then by the usage of these as a mixture, we tend to offer a solution. And you don't need to mug all these up in order to be up to date with all the concepts. Just understand what each of these does and have them at the back of your mind. And whenever you are faced with some particular situation, like for example, if I take the iteration over the array in this case, so every one of you might be able to refer to a little bit that we did study about something called the map method, which did something. So if there's a scenario like this, just head over to Google and look like what this map method actually do. And that's basically what every developer does. They Google a lot. They have this tiny bits of information they retain from their initial phase of learning. And then once you keep building, once you keep creating new projects, you have this sort of muscle memory which helps you retain all this knowledge that is used again and again. So some of the functions, some of the concepts, some of the functionalities that are used time and again, these are actually the one that every developer knows by heart. So that was all from my side for this particular session, and I'll see you in the next one.